Captain Jack Monroe was not a man who believed in fate. After years of service in the United Earth Fleet, he had learned to trust in strategy, reason, and sometimes sheer luck, anything but destiny. He had seen enough devastation, both on and off the battlefield, to question the very idea of a higher power guiding the course of his life. The stars he traveled through felt cold, unfeeling, and impersonal, much like the galaxy he had come to know. Each uncharted system he explored only reaffirmed his belief that the universe was vast, indifferent, and ultimately empty. But that was before the day he found her. The mission had been routine, if not a little tedious. Jack's orders were simple: survey a dead, forgotten planet at the edge of a nameless system. A former outpost, now abandoned and left to wither under the weight of cosmic entropy. His ship, the Leviathan, was equipped with the latest survey tech, designed to assess everything from the geological composition of a planet to detecting traces of past life. He didn't expect much, just another lonely assignment with no real purpose other than completing the paperwork back at headquarters. As Jack landed on the barren world, the harsh winds whipped across the desolate surface, carrying dust and remnants of a civilization long gone. The planet's atmosphere was thin, offering little protection from the cold. Jack set out on foot, following the coordinates provided by the fleet. The terrain was mostly rocky with deep craters and ancient ruins scattered across the landscape. The silence was overwhelming. No creatures. No sounds except for the distant howling winds. Nothing. Just emptiness. It was while exploring an old wreckage that he first saw her. At first, he thought it was just another piece of debris, something left behind from the war or some long-forgotten conflict. But as he approached the wreckage, the shape of a pod became clear. It was small, damaged, and half buried under the sand. There was a faint glow coming from the interior, indicating that whatever it was, it still had power. Curiosity got the best of him. Jack moved closer and crouched by the wreck, scanning it for any signs of life. His breath formed visible clouds in the frigid air, but his heart was beating faster now, a sense of unease settling in. He was used to finding things out here, wrecked ships, abandoned colonies, but nothing like this. His hand hovered over the hatch, ready to open it, when a soft, labored gasp echoed from within. He hesitated, his instincts telling him to back away. But something in that voice, a fragile, almost desperate sound, made him push forward. With a flick of a switch, the pod's hatch slid open with a hiss, releasing a gust of cold air that almost knocked Jack back. Inside, he found her. The girl was unconscious, her body frail and covered in strange burns and bruises. Her skin was unlike any human Jack had ever seen, slightly translucent, with faint bioluminescent patterns running along her arms. Her features were alien but beautiful in their own way, delicate and haunting. She was clearly humanoid, but there was no mistaking the otherworldly quality to her appearance. Her hair, or what appeared to be hair, shimmered like liquid silver, flowing in thin strands that seemed to move of their own accord. She was unconscious, and her breathing was shallow. For a moment, Jack stood there, frozen, not sure what to do. He had found plenty of strange things in his travels, but never something like this. Was she human? Could she even survive on this planet? The last thing Jack wanted was to be involved in some galactic mess, but something told him that this wasn't a simple rescue operation. She had been through something terrible, and Jack couldn't just leave her here to die. After a few moments, Jack snapped into action. He carefully lifted her out of the pod, cradling her fragile form in his arms. Despite her size, she felt impossibly light, like a doll or a broken piece of porcelain. Her body was cold to the touch, and Jack could feel the steady pulse of life, but it was faint, like a candle flickering in the wind. His first thought was to get her to the med bay on the Leviathan, but he wasn't sure if she'd survive the journey. She had to be stabilized, and fast. Jack knew he wasn't equipped to deal with alien physiology, but his military training had taught him how to improvise under pressure. His mind raced, looking for a solution, anything to keep this stranger from dying in his arms. He carried her back to his ship, making sure to shield her from the harsh winds of the planet's surface. Inside the ship, the warmth of the interior contrasted with the cold world outside. He placed her gently on one of the medical tables, quickly activating the ship's emergency systems. There was no time to waste. As Jack worked, he couldn't help but wonder who she was, where she had come from, and why she had ended up on this forsaken planet. Her wounds were extensive, and they didn't look like anything he had ever seen before. The burns on her skin were not from any natural source. There was a peculiar, unnatural nature to them, as if she had been subjected to some kind of weapon. When the medical scanners came online, they revealed even more troubling information. Her body was in a state of shock, and her internal organs were showing signs of severe trauma. Jack had seen enough battlefield injuries to recognize the severity of the damage, but this was different. This wasn't from a war zone or a battle. This was something far more personal, more horrifying. The girl was not just hurt. She had been hunted. The realization hit Jack like a punch to the gut. His mind flashed to the wreckage, to the pod she had been found in, to the signs of struggle and desperation that were clear even in the sparse information the medical systems were giving him. This wasn't some casualty of war. This was a girl, lost and broken, with nothing left but the pain of a destroyed world. As Jack worked tirelessly to stabilize her, the weight of the situation began to sink in. He had no idea who or what she was, where she had come from, or why she had been abandoned on this lonely planet. But one thing was clear: she was not just a survivor of some random disaster. She was a victim of something far worse. And Jack was now responsible for her survival. With a deep breath, Jack looked down at the alien girl, her face pale and bruised, her silver hair splayed across the medical table. In the midst of his doubts and fears, something stirred in him. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He wasn't just a man lost in the vast emptiness of space. He was someone's hope. And for the first time in a long while, Jack Monroe felt the weight of a responsibility greater than any mission he had ever faced. Days passed, but the girl remained unconscious. Jack's world revolved around her fragile state, the beeping of the medical monitors in the background marking the rhythm of their shared struggle. His quarters on the Leviathan had been transformed into something more akin to a makeshift hospital, filled with the sterile hum of machines and the lingering smell of antiseptic. The crew had given him space, knowing well that his mind was consumed by the one patient he couldn't afford to fail. The isolation was almost suffocating, but it wasn't the solitude that weighed on Jack's heart, it was the girl herself. Every hour that passed without any sign of improvement felt like a personal failure. He had no idea how to help her. His medical training had never prepared him for alien life, much less the condition she was in. The scans indicated that her physiology was far from human, but there were similarities too, enough to suggest that she might be a sentient species, a species that had suffered an unimaginable trauma. The burns on her skin had not been caused by natural means, and Jack knew that someone, or something, had inflicted them deliberately. But why? What could a being like her possibly have done to deserve such a fate? As the days wore on, Jack found himself studying her more closely. Her alien features, though unusual, were striking. Her skin was a pale shade of violet, translucent in places, with faint glowing lines running across it. Her eyes, when they fluttered open in moments of unconscious awareness, were the color of the deepest ocean, a striking contrast to her otherwise ethereal appearance. Despite her alien nature, there was something heartbreakingly human about her, a vulnerability that Jack couldn't ignore. She looked so fragile, so alone, as if she had been abandoned by everything she had once known. The stark contrast between her beauty and the brutality she had endured made Jack feel an overwhelming surge of protectiveness. He wasn't used to feeling this way. It had been years since he had allowed himself to care about anything outside of his duty. The loss of his own family in the early years of his service had taught him to lock away emotions, to focus on the mission and the next battle, because that was what kept him alive. But here, with this girl, who in many ways had no one, his walls were crumbling. He couldn't shake the sense that fate had brought her to him for a reason, though he couldn't fathom what that reason might be. The medical logs provided no answers. the girl's species remained a mystery. Her pod, though advanced, wasn't equipped with any recognizable insignia or markings that could point Jack in the direction of her homeworld. No known alien race matched the biological readings. The scans of her genetic structure were too foreign to analyze with Earth-based technology, and there was nothing Jack could do to bridge the gap. Her language, too, was silent. She hadn't spoken a word since he found her, and even when she stirred, the only sounds she made were faint gasps and whispered breaths. Jack couldn't even confirm if she was truly human in any way. She could have been a completely different kind of life form, one beyond the understanding of his species. Yet, despite all the evidence to the contrary, Jack found himself clinging to the belief that she was just like him, just like Earthlings, someone who had been caught in the unfeeling grasp of the universe, someone who had a story worth saving. Then, there was the silence. In the void of the ship, with no one to share the burden of the girl's care, Jack's mind often wandered into dark places. He thought of his past, of the choices he had made, and the people he had left behind. The war had consumed him, had taken him from his home, leaving only a hollow shell of the man who had once known love, warmth, and the joy of human connection. He had buried his past long ago, deep in his mind, because that's what soldiers did. They buried their emotions in the name of survival. But now, with this girl lying in front of him, vulnerable and dependent on him for survival, Jack was forced to confront the guilt and the heartache that he had kept hidden for so long. He felt like he had abandoned his own humanity, that he had chosen to numb himself in order to serve the greater good, to fight in wars that seemed endless, purposeless, and cold. The girl, in her unconscious state, had forced him to feel again, forced him to remember what it meant to be human. The thought of losing her, the thought that this fragile, alien being could slip through his fingers, just as everyone else had in his life, was unbearable. She didn't deserve this fate. No one deserved to be discarded like this. A breakthrough came when the girl's breathing patterns began to change. It was subtle at first, an increased rate of breath, a slight flutter of her eyelids as if she were fighting to wake up. It wasn't much, but to Jack, it was everything. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a sliver of hope. She was alive, truly alive, and there was a chance that she might survive. He had done everything he could to stabilize her, administering fluids, monitoring her vitals, and constantly adjusting the medical systems to match her alien biology. It wasn't perfect, but he had kept her alive long enough to show that she might pull through. Still, there was no guarantee. She could slip away in the next hour, the next moment. Jack was no fool. He knew that. But he also knew that he couldn't give up on her. Not now. Not when she had no one else to turn to. He had failed once before, but he couldn't let history repeat itself. That night, when Jack sat by her side, holding her hand as if it might anchor him to some semblance of reality, the girl's eyes finally opened. They were still unfocused, still clouded by the haze of unconsciousness, but they were open. Jack's heart leapt in his chest. She was alive. She had made it this far, and that was something. The girl's hand moved weakly in his grasp, her fingers brushing his skin in a gentle motion. Her lips parted, and for the first time, she made a sound. It wasn't a word, but a faint, broken whisper. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell Jack that she wasn't entirely lost to the void. In that moment, Jack felt a bond form between them, something deep and unspoken. He wasn't alone anymore. And neither was she. The next day, the girl's condition had improved slightly. Her breathing was steadier, and the once faint glow in her skin seemed to pulse with a new rhythm. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jack had spent the past several days trying to learn whatever he could about her, but the knowledge he had acquired only deepened the mystery. Her species defied all known classifications. She wasn't human, and yet she shared more similarities with humanity than any alien Jack had ever encountered. Her body, despite its alien features, seemed to function similarly to human physiology, but there were still enough differences to prevent any clear identification of her race or origin. As Jack continued to monitor her, he couldn't shake the sense that there was more to this girl than met the eye. The way her eyes seemed to shine with a strange intensity, The way her faint whispers sounded like they were trying to convey something beyond her physical condition, it all suggested that she was more than just a survivor of some distant, forgotten war. She had a purpose. But what was it? And why had she been left to die alone in space? Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a low hum coming from the girl's body. At first, he thought it was just another sign of her body attempting to regulate itself, but as the hum continued, he began to feel a faint vibration in the air. It was as if her presence was causing some kind of shift in the very atmosphere of the room. He leaned in closer, instinctively holding his breath, as he searched for any clue as to what was happening. The energy in the room seemed to intensify, and Jack felt a strange sensation crawling up his spine, something ancient, something raw. It was as though she was connected to something far beyond this ship, far beyond even the galaxy. The girl stirred slightly, her fingers twitching as though trying to reach for something unseen. Jack had no idea what was happening, but he was certain that whatever it was not natural. Her physiology was reacting to something. Perhaps her own biology was attempting to reawaken something deep within her. The idea that she might hold knowledge or power beyond anything humanity could comprehend only made Jack more determined to figure out who she was and what she had experienced. He began to dig into his resources, seeking any kind of clue that might help him understand her better. The records of past alien encounters were sparse, but Jack had learned that nothing could truly prepare someone for the discovery of an unknown life form. What he uncovered was as frustrating as it was enlightening. There were no records of her species, no legends, no lore, nothing. She didn't exist in any of the galactic archives, and that made her even more fascinating. The girl seemed to be a ghost from a forgotten corner of the universe, an entity lost to time. Jack's obsession with learning about her deepened. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight, to survive, to protect. But now, with the girl's life hanging in the balance, he felt a shift inside him. This wasn't a mission he could complete by simply following orders. There were no enemies to defeat, no battles to be won. This was something far more intimate, a matter of life and death, of understanding a being whose existence had eluded humanity for eons. One evening, as Jack sat by her side, the girl's hand moved again. This time, it wasn't a twitch, it was a deliberate motion, as if she were trying to communicate. Jack leaned forward, his pulse quickening as he watched her struggle to open her eyes. Her gaze flickered towards him, though her focus remained clouded. "Who are you?" Her voice was weak, but there was a certain clarity to it. The words were broken, but they carried an unmistakable weight. Jack could hardly believe what he had heard. For days, the girl had been silent, and now, in this fragile moment, she was speaking. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign of true awareness. He could see the fear in her eyes, the deep confusion, and the need for answers. But Jack wasn't sure he had any answers to give her. He wasn't even sure he had any of his own. "I'm Jack," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who you are, but I'm here. You're safe." The girl's lips parted again, but she didn't speak immediately. Her eyes closed briefly, as though she were weighing the words in her mind. Then, with great effort, she managed to speak again. "The stars, they remember. They speak. We are not alone." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The way she spoke, so cryptic, so certain, made it clear that she was not just speaking of personal experiences. She was referring to something much larger, something beyond the individual. What did she mean by "the stars remember"? And what was she trying to tell him? Before he could ask more questions, the girl's body tensed as though overwhelmed by pain. She gasped, her eyes widening in a panic that Jack had never seen before. It was as if a flood of memories had crashed over her, memories that she wasn't ready to face, and the strain was too much for her weakened form. Her breathing became shallow and erratic, and for a moment, Jack feared that she was slipping away from him. "No," Jack muttered to himself, desperately trying to calm her. He didn't know what to do. He had no answers. But he couldn't lose her now, not after everything. "Stay with me. Please." Her grip on his hand tightened, and for a few moments the two were locked in a silent exchange, each trying to make sense of what was happening. Jack's mind raced, but all he could focus on was the girl's fear, the undeniable terror in her eyes. It was clear that whatever she had witnessed in her past was more than she could bear. With one final, labored breath, the girl's eyes closed, and she slumped back against the medical bed. Jack's heart sank as he watched her. But he didn't let go. He couldn't. There was something about this girl that had changed him. She had shown him a glimpse of something larger, something far beyond the cold, impersonal world of war and survival. She had a purpose, a role to play in the story of the universe, and somehow, Jack was now a part of it. The silence in the room grew thick as Jack sat there, holding her hand. The mystery of who she was, what she had been through, and what she had yet to reveal remained unsolved. But Jack knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let her face whatever horrors awaited her alone. As the days passed, Jack's focus on the girl became all-consuming. He found himself lost in her mysterious condition, and as her health continued to improve, so did his understanding of her. She had begun to speak more clearly, and with each word, Jack learned a little more about her. But still, the full story remained elusive. Her memories were scattered fragments, jumbled and confused, but they offered glimpses of something extraordinary, something far beyond anything Jack had ever imagined. The girl's voice had become more confident as she regained her strength, but there was always an undertone of sadness in her words. She spoke of a lost civilization, one that had once thrived in the far reaches of the galaxy, but whose downfall had been catastrophic. She spoke of betrayal, of powerful enemies who had wiped out entire planets, and of a war that had consumed everything she knew. But there was something more to her story, something Jack couldn't quite grasp. Her name, as it turned out, was Lyra, and she was not from Earth. She was from a distant star system that no one had ever heard of, a place that had once been a beacon of knowledge and power in the galaxy. But now, that system was nothing more than a shattered remnant of its former glory, a place forgotten by the stars themselves. Lyra was one of the last survivors, the last of her kind, and she had been sent to find something that could save what was left of her people. The weight of her mission was clear, but Lyra was reluctant to speak more about it. She seemed to carry the burden of her people's extinction on her shoulders, and the more she tried to remember, the more it seemed to torment her. She spoke of strange technology, of forgotten artifacts that had the power to change the fate of entire civilizations. But those artifacts had been lost long ago, scattered across the universe, hidden in places where only the most determined could ever hope to find them. Lyra had been one of those who had sought them out, but the journey had cost her everything. As Jack listened to her story, he began to understand the depth of her pain. This wasn't just about survival or victory, it was about hope. Lyra was searching for a way to restore what had been lost, to rebuild her people's legacy. But the more she spoke, the clearer it became that her mission was not just hers to complete, it was something the entire galaxy would one day depend on. If Lyra succeeded in finding the lost technology, it could change the course of history. If she failed, however, there was no telling what would happen. Jack's role in all of this had become more complicated. At first, he had thought he was simply saving a stranded alien girl, but now he realized that the stakes were much higher. Lyra's survival wasn't just important for her, it was important for the entire galaxy. The weight of this knowledge pressed heavily on Jack, and he struggled with the responsibility. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight and protect, but now he found himself in the middle of something that defied all his training. He couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of guilt. He had become too attached to Lyra. He had seen her as a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. But now, the girl had become more than just a mission to him. She was someone he cared about, someone whose pain he felt deeply. He couldn't bear the thought of her failing in her mission, of losing her to whatever enemies had hunted her down in the first place. He needed to help her, to protect her, but he had no idea how. As the days stretched on, Jack began to see more of the damage that the war had done to Lyra. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a broken soul, one whose trust had been shattered by betrayal. She spoke of allies who had turned on her, of friends who had fallen in battle, and of the endless pain of watching everything she knew disintegrate before her eyes. But there was more to it than that. Every time she spoke of the war, Jack could see the shadows in her eyes, the flickers of terror that passed through her when she recalled certain memories. There were things that she wasn't telling him, things that she wasn't ready to confront. And yet, despite all this, there was a fire in her that refused to die out. Lyra had not given up, and as much as Jack wished he could carry the burden for her, he knew he couldn't. This was her fight, not his. One night, as they sat in silence, Jack found himself struggling to reconcile the weight of his feelings for her. He had been in combat before, but this was different. There was a tenderness in his heart now, a concern that went beyond the physical. Lyra wasn't just a mission, she was someone he cared about deeply, and that realization terrified him. He had seen the brutality of war, the way it stripped people of their humanity, but Lyra had survived it all. She had endured things that no one should ever have to endure, and yet she was still here, still fighting, still hoping. Jack knew that he couldn't keep pretending that this was just another mission. The stakes were too high, and his own emotions were too involved. Lyra needed more than just protection. She needed someone who would believe in her, someone who would fight for her cause. And in that moment, Jack realized that he had become that person. He had to be. The galaxy needed Lyra, and the only way she could succeed was if she knew that she wasn't alone. But as the days wore on, the truth of the situation became clear. Lyra's enemies were closing in, and they weren't just after her, they were after what she knew. The technology, the secrets, the artifacts, everything Lyra had been searching for was now a target. The girl was no longer just a survivor, she was the key to a future that was slipping away. And Jack knew that no matter how hard he tried to protect her, the road ahead would only get darker. There was no escaping the war that had consumed her world, and there was no telling how far it would stretch into his own. Jack had never believed in destiny or fate. He had always believed that people made their own paths, that they controlled their own futures. But as he looked at Lyra, this girl from a distant star system, with nothing left but the memory of a broken world, he couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the universe had brought them together for a reason. Maybe, just maybe, he was meant to be the one to help her rebuild what had been lost. But as much as Jack wanted to believe that, he knew one thing for sure: the path ahead would not be easy. As the final confrontation loomed closer, Jack couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that the universe had a cruel way of testing his resolve. Lyra, once a mysterious alien with nothing but fragments of her past to hold on to, had become something more to him. She was not just a survivor of an unimaginable catastrophe, she was a symbol of everything humanity had once fought for and everything they stood to lose. In her eyes, Jack saw the raw determination of someone who refused to succumb to the overwhelming forces that had torn her world apart. But now, as the enemy drew closer, he knew that no matter how much he wished to protect her, Lyra's journey would lead to a choice either of them were prepared for. The weeks that had followed their initial meeting had been filled with tense moments, urgent planning, and sleepless nights. Jack and Lyra had forged an unspoken bond, one built on shared loss, fragile hope, and a desperate need to find answers. But as the truth of Lyra's mission came into sharper focus, so did the realization that what she was searching for was no longer just about her people's survival. It was about the survival of all civilizations. The artifact she sought could change the tide of the war, end the devastation, and potentially give those who wielded it unimaginable power. The weight of that responsibility had become too heavy for Lyra to carry alone, and now, more than ever, Jack understood that he was part of something far bigger than either of them had anticipated. There were moments when Jack found himself at a crossroads, torn between his duty as a soldier and his growing attachment to Lyra. Every instinct within him screamed to protect her, to shield her from the horrors that she had already endured. But at the same time, he knew that the only way to truly protect her was to help her succeed in her mission. The artifact could not fall into the wrong hands. That much was certain. The enemies that pursued them were relentless, and would stop at nothing to ensure its power was used for destruction, not salvation. Jack had seen firsthand the lengths to which they would go to achieve their goals, and he knew that failure was not an option. As the final days of preparation ticked by, the reality of their situation became more apparent. The war Lyra had been fighting was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for everything she believed in. She spoke less of her past and more about what lay ahead. The fear of failure weighed heavily on her, but it wasn't just fear of death. It was fear of what the galaxy would become if the wrong forces gained control of the artifact. She had seen it before, empires born from the ashes of worlds, armies of darkness spreading across the stars. But she had also seen the spark of hope, the fire in the hearts of those who had chosen to fight back, even when the odds were insurmountable. Lyra's mission had always been about hope, but now it was about redemption. Not just for her people, but for the universe. Jack's thoughts kept drifting back to the girl who had arrived in his life as nothing but a broken vessel of sorrow and loss. Now, she was a beacon of hope in the midst of unimaginable chaos. He couldn't deny it anymore. He had come to care for her deeply, and it wasn't just about her survival. It was about what she represented. The strength she displayed in the face of overwhelming odds inspired him, but the pain in her eyes reminded him that this fight wasn't over. It wasn't over for her, and it wasn't over for the galaxy. In the quiet moments they shared, Jack would often catch Lyra staring out into the distance, her eyes lost in the vastness of space. He wondered what she was thinking, what memories haunted her. He knew that the battle ahead would not just be a physical one, it would be an emotional one as well. She had come to him as a stranger, but now, she was something more, something that had woven itself into the fabric of his own heart. He wasn't just fighting for her anymore. He was fighting for a future where things like the destruction of entire civilizations didn't happen, where the galaxy could heal from the wounds it had suffered. The final days before their plan to retrieve the artifact were filled with quiet anticipation. Every movement, every decision, was weighed carefully. But Jack knew that no amount of preparation could shield them from the reality that awaited. They were about to face an enemy unlike any they had encountered before, one that had the resources, the ruthlessness, and the power to obliterate everything in their path. Lyra had spoken of them in hushed tones, of their methods, of their cruelty. But there was one thing they had underestimated: the will of the survivors. Lyra had proven that she would never give up, no matter the cost. And Jack was no longer just a soldier. He was part of her team, her ally, and her friend. And that bond would carry them through the impossible. As the time came to make their move, Jack felt a surge of determination. He knew the odds were against them, but he also knew that this wasn't just about fighting for survival. It was about fighting for a future where hope wasn't lost, and where the light of one person could ignite the hearts of many. And as they embarked on their final journey together, Jack realized that Lyra's story had become intertwined with his own. They were no longer just two people fighting for survival. They were the last remnants of something greater, something that could change the course of history. And for the first time, Jack felt a sense of peace in the chaos. He wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them was.